Good morning. My name is Ansamanoku, and I will be going through my research design proposal for DBA 810. I'm going to give a little bit of background. So telework, also known as remote work, has been an option in many organizations and a particular staple in the federal government workplace. In recent years, this work option has gained more traction in terms of popularity. It's often assumed that employees desire telework options as this reduces the stress of commuting and at times from far locales to the formal work site. It's also assumed that employees are more productive performing tasks from the convenience of their homes. So, despite the perceived value of remote work, this option has led to some challenges with work productivity. So moving on to the management problem, which I have identified is why is fully remote work productivity lower than on-site work? And it was identified in the Harvard Business Review that fully remote work is up to 10% less productive than on-site work on average. Moving on to the research question, how does the productivity of fully remote workers compare to that of on-site employees within large government organizations? I've identified the three major variables in this study, which starting off with is productivity, or the dependent variable, which is the total amount of tasks and or projects complete within a specific time frame. Remote workers, which is the independent variable, is a large organization with 5,000 employees with a sample size of 500. Roughly half will be in this category. And the reason why I came up with this constraint is because it leaves less margin of error and more room for positive outliers. And then finally, we have another independent variable, which is for on-site workers, with the remaining number of which would be the employees working in the facility. And then a 5-year historical work schedule data will be collected. We identified several objectives. First one is to assess the impact of remote work on performance metrics, to assess how remote working arrangements affect performance metrics, to identify the factors that affect productivity, to identify the major factors that influence productivity with fully remote workers compared to those that influence on-site workers' productivity, to evaluate the impact of remote work on performance metrics, and finally, to evaluate how remote work arrangements impact performance metrics compared to on-site environments. Key terms and definitions. Variables. Variables are generally the factors to be observed within the study. The dependent variable, which are variables that are directly influenced by the independent variable. In this study, the dependent variable will be work productivity. And we have independent variables, and these are variables that remain constant and influence other factors. These include the remote workers and on-site employees. And then validity, the measurement tools for this study consider all variables relevant. The research method, the statistical method selected will be based on a mixed method model. This is a model that gathers and evaluates quantitative and qualitative data. This analysis method would be appropriate since it can provide a more comprehensive understanding of the dynamics between fully remote and on-site employees. A quantitative survey and data analysis will identify general patterns. And under this would be statistical techniques to measure the comparison of productivity between the two groups, which includes t-tests for comparing means or regression analysis to account for potential variables. And then qualitative interviews would explore the reasons behind those patterns in greater depth. And for this study, a utilization of existing data sets from within the organization's performance metrics and statistical methods will be applied to analyze the existing data sets to identify patterns in productivity between remote and on-site workers. The study will be divided into 3 phases. First phase would have an investigation of results to be obtained by focus group interviews between remote and on-site workers. Phase 2 will be surveys that will be conducted for on-site and remote workers that will provide a detailed quantitative analysis. And then phase 3, which would be an analysis of observational and interview data. Historical data will be acquired from the OPM website, and this would also have data for completed work projects of remote and on-site workers between the current year and the previous 5-year period for comparison. So for this chart, which is the KPIs for remote work, this will be divided into 3 different criteria: focus, KPIs, which are key performance indicators, which are a set of quantifiable measurements used to gauge a company's overall long-term performance, and then policy decisions, which would also measure the main characteristics that would be significant in remote work schedules, which would be work, vision, empowerment and engagement, and human capital. For the literature review, I utilized the UMGC library, EBSCOhost, and DOAJ with keyword search listings listed below. And I evaluated 3 major sources, which are again listed below. For the literature review, I found 3 major criteria to critique my articles. The research objective, identified the 3 major areas to critique between that, problems addressed, and findings. Each of the bullet points display what area each article tackled. For example, under the research objective found in industrial and commercial training was to investigate the relationship between productivity and work-life balance of remote workers. Same can be said for the weaknesses in the research that I identified within the first article of industrial and commercial training. I found that only the current employees working at IT companies in Kerala were surveyed, and this limited scope may not be consistent with other types of industries. So to close the gap for this, I figured to conduct research with large organizations in varied industries would be most appropriate. The intended outcomes for this study would be to create ideas on what areas of improvement would be needed for remote workers to work as effectively as on-site employees in large government entities, to gain an in-depth understanding of the factors influencing productivity in remote and on-site work settings, such as work-life balance and communication practices. And then finally, to contribute valuable insight into the development of organizational policies in large government organizations. Then that concludes my period of instruction.